There are 23 old VHS tapes that are secretly worth a fortune in 2026, and you might own one right now, in a box in the loft, on a shelf under the television, or in a bin bag you have been meaning to take to the tip for years. Here is the strange thing about videotapes. For decades, they were the most disposable object in the house, given away, taped over, thrown out by the skipful, and that is exactly why the few that survived, sealed and untouched, have become so valuable. Tonight I'm going to count them up, from the common tapes that are worth nothing at all, which I will be honest with you about, all the way to a single sealed tape at number 1 that sold for $75,000, and I will show you exactly what to check on every tape in the house before you throw a single one away. Let me be honest with you before we start, because false hope helps nobody. And with VHS, the false hope is thick on the ground. The overwhelming majority of videotapes are worth nothing. A used tape, a tape out of its case, a tape that has been opened and watched, a recording you made off the television, all of it is worth precisely nothing, and I will not pretend otherwise. But here is what 40 years around the sowrooms taught me. Value in this odd little corner of collecting comes down to two things almost nobody thinks about. And once you know what they are, you can walk through a pile of 100 tapes and pick out the one that matters. Knowledge is the only protection you have got. A videotape does not carry its price on its face. Two copies of the very same film can sit side by side in the same box, one worth nothing and the other worth thousands. And the only difference is whether the shrink wrap has ever been broken and how early the release was. And there is no shame in not knowing that, because the whole of this odd little hobby rests on the fact that most people do not. Now, before we carry on, let me say one thing. The support my channel has had lately has been overwhelming, and I mean that. So here's what I've decided. I'm not putting ads on these videos. You've given me your time, and I won't have it interrupted. If you'd like to support my channel, there's one way. You can scan the code on screen now with your phone's camera to get my book. I've put everything I know into one book, the Household and Collectibles Price Guide, 2027 edition. Every common item you might own, how to value it, and what it actually sells for. It even tells you where and how to sell it, who buys it, what they'll pay, and which route to take for which object. To get it, and everything I know, it's over at my website, malcolmashby.com. That's MALCOLMASHBY.com. Right, let's carry on. Number 23, the ordinary used Hollywood tape. And we begin here to clear the ground, because this is the tape almost everyone has. The opened, watched, ex-rental or ex-sell-through copy of a big film, and I have to be straight with you, it is worth nothing. Disney, the blockbusters everyone owned, the tapes that sold in their millions, a used copy is landfill, and I will not tell you otherwise. But there is a lesson even in the worthless tape, and it is the first of the two checks I want you to carry through this whole video. It is not the film that gives a tape value, it is whether it is sealed and how early the release was, and the common used tape fails both tests. So do not despair at the size of the pile, because you are hunting for two specific things and everything else is packing around them. I have watched people carry whole bin bags of tapes to the tip without a second thought, and in most cases they were right to, but every so often there was one tape in that bag, sealed and early, that was worth more than the car they carried it in, and out it went with the rest. Number 22. The home recording off the television, the tape with your own handwriting on the label, Christmas 1988, or the football, or a wedding. I put this here to spare you heartbreak, because these have no commercial value at all, none. But they may have a value to you and yours that no sailor room can touch, and my honest advice is to have the important family ones digitized before the tape degrades, because magnetic tape does not last forever, and a wedding or a first birthday is worth more to your family than any sealed blockbuster is to a collector. That is the one time in this video I will tell you the sentimental value is the real value. I have sat in enough front rooms after a bereavement to know that a home tape of a voice you will never hear again is beyond any price a sowroom could put on it. So get those digitized first before you ever worry about the sealed blockbusters. Number 21. The common sealed sell-through tape from the 1990s. And here we take the first small step up, because sealed does matter, but timing matters just as much. A tape that was sold sealed by the million in the late 1990s, still in its shrink wrap, is worth a little, $10 or $20 perhaps, to the right buyer, but not a fortune, because millions of them were sealed and plenty survived. Your test tonight: look at the shrink wrap and look at the date, because sealed alone is not enough when the whole world had one, and the value only really begins when sealed meets genuinely early and genuinely scarce. This is the single hardest thing for people to accept, that their sealed 1990s tape, which feels old and precious, is common because the whole world sealed theirs too, and it is only when sealed meets truly early that the numbers begin to move. Number 20. Ex-rental big box tapes from the early 80s, the oversized clamshell and big cardboard cases the rental shops used before the standard slipcase. Even used, these early rental tapes have a following because so few survived the rental circuit intact, and a big box horror or cult title in decent shape brings $20 to $100. Your test tonight: look for the unusually large case, the clamshell that snaps shut, or the tall cardboard box, because that oversized format marks a tape as an early rental from the dawn of home video, and collectors of a certain age chase them hard. The rental shops rented these out hundreds of times and then dumped them by the skip when the format changed, which is exactly why so few survive, and why the ones that did have quietly become collectible despite being battered and used. Number 19. Cult and horror titles on small labels, the video nasties, the obscure horror, the low-budget films that had tiny print runs on labels that vanished. This is where used tapes start to carry real money, because rarity beats fame here, and an obscure horror title that only ever had a few thousand copies pressed can bring $50 to several $100 even used. Your test tonight: the more obscure and disreputable the title, and the more no-name the label on the spine, the more interest there may be, because in this corner of collecting the film nobody remembers can be worth more than the blockbuster everybody owned. It runs against every instinct, but the logic is simple, because the blockbuster sold millions and survived in millions, while the obscure horror on the vanished label pressed a few thousand and most were lost, so scarcity does the work that fame cannot. Number 18. Banned and withdrawn titles, the tapes pulled from shelves for legal or content reasons, which instantly became scarce because no more were ever made. A title that was withdrawn, banned, or recalled stops being printed the moment it is pulled, and that hard stop on supply is exactly what collectors pay for, with good examples bringing $50 to several $100. Your test tonight: if you remember a tape being controversial in its day, or a title you cannot find in any shop now, do not assume it is worthless, because the very thing that got it pulled is the thing that makes it scarce. When a title is withdrawn, the supply stops dead on that day. No more are ever made, and every copy destroyed afterward makes the survivors rarer, which is a mechanism collectors understand perfectly, even when the wider public has forgotten the film ever existed. Number 17. Disney Black Diamond and early Disney tapes. And I must be careful here, because the internet has told a great fib about these. The so-called Black Diamond Disney classics are not worth thousands, despite what viral posts claim, because Disney sold them by the tens of millions and almost every household had them. Used, they are worth $1 or $2, but a genuinely sealed early Disney release in its shrink wrap, untouched, is a different matter and can bring real money. Your test tonight: ignore the Black Diamond myth entirely if the tape is opened, and only get excited if it is genuinely sealed, because with Disney above all, opened means common and sealed means scarce. I cannot say this often enough, because the Black Diamond story has done real harm, sending people to sell opened Disney tapes for imagined fortunes and leaving them bitterly disappointed, when the plain truth is that only the genuinely sealed early copies carry any real money at all. Number 16. Sealed 90s blockbusters in graded condition, the big films of the 1990s that survived sealed and can be professionally graded. Once a sealed tape is authenticated and graded by a grading service, even a common title climbs, because the grade turns an ordinary object into a collectible, and graded sealed 90s tapes bring $100 to several $100s. Your test tonight: if you have a genuinely sealed tape of any well-loved film, do not open it under any circumstances, because the seal is the entire value, and the moment you break that shrink wrap to have a look, you have destroyed most of what it was worth. I have seen it happen. A family finds a sealed tape, gets curious, peels back the wrap to check the tape is inside, and in that one innocent moment turns a graded collectible back into an ordinary used tape worth $1 or $2. Number 15. Early promotional and screener tapes, the copies sent to critics, shops and cinemas before public release, marked not for resale or for promotional use only. These were never sold to the public, so very few exist, and a promotional or screener tape of a major film can bring $100 to several $100s. Your test tonight: read the label carefully for the words promotional, screener, or not for resale, because a tape that was never meant to reach the public is by definition scarce, and scarcity, not fame, is what pays in this game. A promotional or screener copy was made in tiny numbers for a specific professional purpose and was never supposed to survive at all, so the ones that slipped out and were kept are exactly the sort of genuinely scarce object that this hobby rewards. Number 14. First release horror on collectible labels, the early horror titles from the labels that collectors now revere in their first pressing rather than a later reissue. First pressings on the right label bring far more than later copies of the same film, from 100 into the several hundreds. Your test tonight: learn to tell a first release from a reissue by the label design and the catalogue number, because two tapes of the same film can look almost identical while one is worth 10 times the other, and that difference is the first pressing. The catalogue number and the label design are the fingerprints of a tape, and learning to read them is what separates the collector who pays a fortune knowingly from the seller who lets a first pressing go for the price of a reissue, never realizing the two were different at all. Number 13. Sealed cult classics with a devoted following, the films that were not huge at the cinema but built a passionate fan base over the years, surviving sealed. A devoted fan base plus a sealed tape is a powerful combination, and sealed cult titles bring several $100s and the best more. Your test tonight: think about which films have a cult around them now, the ones people quote and collect, because a sealed tape of a film with living active fans is worth far more than a sealed tape of a film everyone has forgotten. A collectible is only ever worth what a passionate person will pay for it, so a film with a living cult around it, people who quote it and gather over it, has a built-in market of buyers that a forgotten film, however scarce, simply does not. Number 12. Graded sealed 80s tapes, the films from the 1980s that survived sealed and graded high, and here we cross into serious money. The 80s are the sweet spot for VHS collecting, early enough to be scarce sealed, iconic enough to be wanted, and a graded sealed 80s tape of a loved film brings several $100 to several $1,000s. Your test tonight: an 80s tape that is both sealed and in beautiful condition is the real prize of most lofts, so handle it like glass, keep it out of the heat and the damp, and do not for one moment consider opening it to see the tape inside. Heat and damp are the enemies of a sealed tape, warping the case and clouding the shrink wrap, so a loft, ironically, is one of the worst places to store the very thing a loft so often hides, and a warped box can cost you a grade and a good part of the value. Now, quick word: if you've got any old things at home, don't do anything with them yet, not till you know what they're worth. My full price guide, every common item you might own and what it sells for, is over at my website malcolmashby.com. That's MALCOLM Ashby.com, or scan the code on your screen. Now back to it. Number 11. Sealed Ghostbusters and the loved 80s comedies, the big comedies of the decade that survived sealed. A sealed copy of Ghostbusters sold at a major auction for over 20,000 US dollars, which tells you exactly how far a beloved 80s title can climb when it is sealed and graded. Your test tonight: the more beloved and the more quoted the 80s film, the higher a genuinely sealed copy can go. So a sealed comedy classic in its shrink wrap is not a joke at all. It is potentially one of the most valuable objects in the house. What strikes me about a sale like that is the ordinariness of the object. A comedy tape millions of families rented and watched to pieces, and yet the one that stayed sealed became worth more than most of the furniture in the room it was found in. Number 10. Sealed Jaws and the landmark films, the tapes of the films that changed cinema, surviving sealed. A sealed copy of Jaws sold at auction for over 30,000 US dollars because a landmark film in a sealed early tape brings together everything collectors want: importance and scarcity in one object. Your test tonight: if you own a sealed tape of a film that people call a landmark or a first of its kind, that combination of historical weight and an unbroken seal is exactly what drives these prices, so treat it accordingly. A landmark film carries a weight that collectors respond to because they are not only buying a tape, they are buying a piece of the moment cinema changed. And when that meaning is wrapped in an unbroken early seal, the two together produce numbers that would have seemed absurd to anyone who owned the same film on a battered rental copy. Number 9. Sealed first release Star Wars, the holy grail title of VHS collecting, in its earliest sealed release. Sealed early Star Wars tapes have sold for tens of thousands of US dollars because it is the most collected film franchise in the world, meeting the scarcity of an early sealed tape. Your test tonight: an early sealed Star Wars tape, particularly a first release before the later reissues flooded the market, is one of the most valuable tapes there is. So if you find one sealed in a loft, you have found something genuinely important, not merely nostalgic. The trouble with Star Wars is that it was reissued so many times, in so many editions, that the loft is full of later copies worth very little, and only the trained eye can tell the early sealed release, which is a fortune, from the later one, which is not. Number 8. The Rocketeer sealed grails of the whole hobby. The handful of titles that combine a first release, a perfect grade, and an unbroken seal, which together push into 5 figures. At this level, it is no longer about the film alone, but about the specific copy, its grade, its release, and its condition all lining up. Your test tonight is really a warning that the difference between a tape worth $20 and a tape worth 20,000 is invisible to the eye without knowledge of the release and the grade, which is exactly the discipline that runs under every rung of this video, that the object tells you little and the knowledge tells you everything. At the very top of the hobby, the buyers are as careful as any diamond dealer, weighing the exact grade and the exact release, and the whole of their advantage over an ordinary seller is that they have learnt to read what the seller cannot see. Number 7. Sealed The Goonies, the beloved 80s adventure, in a near-mint sealed copy. A near-mint sealed copy of The Goonies sold at auction for 50,000 US dollars, a staggering figure for a film that, used, is worth almost nothing, which is the whole lesson of VHS in a single sale. Your test tonight: the gap between the used copy and the sealed graded copy of the very same film is the widest in all of collecting, so with a loved 80s title, the entire value hangs on that unbroken shrink wrap and nothing else. It is worth pausing on that sale because The Goonies used is worth almost nothing, a tape you would find in any charity shop bargain bin, and yet the sealed graded copy reached $50,000, which is the entire lesson of this video compressed into one film. Number 6. The near-mint 80s classics as a category, the loved films of the decade that survive in exceptional sealed condition and change hands for tens of thousands. What all of these share is the same recipe: an 80s release, a beloved title, a professional grade, and a seal that has never been broken. Your test tonight: if you are lucky enough to own a sealed and beautifully preserved 80s tape of a film people still love, you are not holding an old videotape, you are holding a graded collectible in the same way a comic or a coin is graded, and it deserves the same care. Number 5, Provenance tapes. The copies that came from somebody connected to the film, an actor, a crew member, the studio itself, which carry a story the ordinary copy cannot. Provenance, a documented connection to the making of the film, adds a premium far beyond the tape alone, and as we are about to see at number 1, it can be the very thing that sets a world record. Your test tonight: if a tape came into your family through someone who worked in film or television, keep every note, every letter, every scrap of paper that proves where it came from, because that paperwork can be worth more than the tape itself. Provenance is the collector's word for a proven story, and a tape that can be shown to have come from someone who made the film or from the studio carries a human connection that no anonymous sealed copy can match, which is exactly why the record we are building toward turns on precisely such a story. Number 4. The record-tier Star Wars sales, the early sealed copies of the first film that have brought the very highest prices in the hobby, well into 5 figures. The most collected franchise in the world, in the earliest and scarcest sealed form, is the natural home of the biggest numbers in VHS. Your test tonight: this is the summit of the film and scarcity combination, and it exists to make one point clear, that in this hobby, the earliest sealed release of the most wanted film is worth a fortune, while the reissue of the same film, used, is worth nothing, and only knowledge tells the two apart. Number 3. The graded near-mint grails just below the record. The specific sealed and perfectly graded copies of the most iconic titles that sit within touching distance of the top price. At this height, every detail matters: the exact release, the exact grade, the exact condition of the seal, and the corners of the box. Your test tonight is the same discipline once more, that at the very top of this market, the value is decided by tiny, invisible distinctions of release and grade, which is precisely why you never sell a sealed tape of an important film until someone who truly knows the hobby has examined it. Number 2. The Goonies at 50,000, revisited as the second highest kind of sale because it shows that a film need not be the most famous in the world to reach the summit, only the most loved and the most perfectly preserved. It was not the biggest film of its year, and yet a sealed copy reached $50,000 on the strength of affection and condition alone. Your test tonight: do not assume only the blockbusters matter, because the deep, warm, lasting affection people hold for a film like this can carry a sealed copy as high as any giant of the box office, so the tape you loved as a child may be the very one that matters. Number 1. And now the payoff, and it is my favorite kind of story, because it turns on a single human detail. In June of 2022, at a major auction in America, a sealed VHS copy of Back to the Future sold for $75,000 US, the highest price ever paid for a videotape. But here is what makes it perfect. That particular tape had belonged to Tom Wilson, the actor who played Biff, the bully, in the films. The studio had sent him a copy of the first release back in the 80s, and he kept it sealed all those years. And when he finally let it go, he included a handwritten note that said, and I am paraphrasing gently, "This is a tape of the first release of Back to the Future, sent to me by the studio. Since I knew the VHS platform would be around forever, I saved it for later, and now I cannot find a VCR. Oh well, enjoy." And there, in one wry little note, is the entire lesson of this video. He saved it because he thought VHS would last forever, and the joke is that VHS did not last at all, which is exactly why the tape he saved is worth $75,000. Everybody else threw theirs away. Here is the reframe I have been walking you toward for 23 rungs. VHS tapes are valuable for the precise reason that they were treated as worthless. They were the most disposable thing in the house, taped over, given away, binned by the millions, and so the sealed survivor is now rare beyond anyone's expectation at the time. The value was created by the throwing away. Your test tonight, and it has run under every tape on this list, is to stop asking whether a film is famous, because fame is the least reliable signal there is, and start asking two questions instead. Is this tape genuinely sealed, its shrink wrap unbroken, and is it a genuinely early release, the first time that film came out, not a later reissue, sealed and early? Those two words are the whole of the VHS trade, and now they are yours. So that is the ladder, from a used blockbuster worth nothing to a sealed tape worth 75,000. And the thread that connects every rung is that sealed and early is everything, and the film itself is almost a detail, and that the very disposability of these tapes is what made the survivors valuable. Never open a sealed tape to have a look, because the look costs you the fortune. Never assume the black diamond myth or any viral post is true, because the internet has told more lies about VHS than about almost anything. And never throw out a box full until you have checked every one for those two words, sealed and early, because in this video they were the only two that ever mattered. If anything today looked familiar, have a proper look before you sell a single thing. Everything's in my price guide over at malcolmashby.com, or scan the code on your screen. I'll leave it up for you.